Hello and welcome to the Ray Show podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Ray, and I'm here with my co-host, Jack Slayton.
How's it going?
Good, man. How are you?
Doing fine.
Good deal. We are here, obviously, recording for a awesome episode we have for you tonight. We are honored, privileged, in every way to be able to talk to Mr. Arthur Brown. So, Jack, you with me on this? Just absolutely the coolest guy in the world.
Oh, yeah. He and his partner, Claire, were some of the sweetest people
Absolutely.
you'd ever meet. Very welcoming, very excited to just talk to us. It was such a humbling experience to have that privilege to meet with them. And
oh, yeah. It was like it wasn't even like we were. It was, but we were being received by royalty in a way, royalty to me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But we'll get to that a little bit. He's got a new record out called Gypsy Voodoo, which we've just been playing the hell out of this thing for since we got our hands on it. It's kind of was like the soundtrack to preparing for Psycho Las Vegas and kind of even when we got there.
Oh, yeah. That was kind of, there were songs on that album that were our anthem for that entire trip, and it kept us going for sure.
It did. But before we get going here, I just want to let you know kind of how I got into Arthur Brown. It's kind of in a weird way, and I was so excited to be able to talk to him about this. But my father had a Alan Parsons Project record called Tales of Mystery and Imagination. You know the one I'm talking about?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would go and fish through his records when I was real small, and I picked that out one day and put it on. And Arthur is the vocal on the Telltale Heart on that, and it scared the bejesus out of me. I remember the first time I heard it, just scared me. And I think I even took it off the record player, put it back, I fished out, something forbidden, and ran away and tried to forget it. And then, 30 minutes later, I was creeping back in there to hear it again. So kind of the story of my life, and set me off on one of many influences that sent me off on a really good path. But then later, discovering him fully, obviously with Fire, like a lot of people got into him. But if you think that's all this man is, you're sorely mistaken. But we'll let him talk about that a little more. He talks about working with Alan Parsons and just so many amazing things. How did you get into him, Jack? Do you remember the first time you heard Arthur Brown?
I do. I was pretty young, and I was getting into a lot of different kinds of psychedelic rock from that era and previous classics, And a friend of mine played me Fire, and I just remember that opening line, "I am the God of Hellfire, and I bring you fire." It was it really felt like I could hear somebody that was possessed by fire.
Absolutely.
It blew my mind, and I'm sure it did for a lot of people, but I never forgot that song. But I remember I forgot who it was by for years and searched for it because I wanted to know more. And finally, a few years later, a buddy of mine played that song again, and I was like, "Who is this?" And he's like, "Arthur Brown." And then ever since then, I just dove straight in to all of it,
And that song, particularly the vocals, like any good rock and roll, it does sound possessed. Like Little Richard sounds possessed.
Absolutely.
Iggy Pop sounds possessed. So, before we get going here, and I know I say this every time, but you're really going to enjoy this chat. He's such a brilliant man and a great keeper of his legacy. He's very articulate. He's very put together with what his art means to him. He knows how to express that. But this is the best interview I've ever done. It was a real conversation, and I remember telling someone that a friend of ours, Steph, before we left for Psycho Las Vegas, we were talking about Arthur Brown. And I said, you know what? I part of me really thinks I'm going to go walk in there and meet Jesus. And I'm not convinced I didn't. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Arthur Brown.
Johnny Ray with the Ray Show podcast, and I'm out here at Psycho Las Vegas 2019. And I have the extreme honor to be sitting here with Mr. Arthur Brown, the mastermind behind the crazy world of Arthur Brown. How are you doing, sir?
Absolutely wonderful.
That is great to hear. You
I like to be in 103 degrees. It fries my brain and I get sensible.
Absolutely. Well, you're out here at Psycho Las Vegas. You're doing a special appearance here at the Fest after you've been on touring behind the excellent new Gypsy Voodoo. One thing I want to kind of start out our conversation with is, when you started, can you remember and can you articulate some of the feelings that you had at your first festival experience, the first festival that you played?
The first festival I played? Yeah, I can actually. That one was in Windsor, and it was the Windsor Jazz and Blues Festival, which sprang out of one of the clubs at the time, the Marquee, which is where the Rolling Stones started, and all of the rock and roll bands that came out had some appearances in the Marquee. And so I had been performing down at UFO, which was the underground club in London, and it only opened once a week for the underground. The rest of the week it was Irish music. And so somebody from the Marquee and somebody from their circuit came down to see us at UFO. And so the next thing was we had a booking in one of the Marquee's clubs. And in those days there were two circuits in England, the Marquee and the Flamingo. Flamingo did people like Georgie Fame. It was blue beat. It was organ-based stuff, soul music, zoot money. The Marquee was more into blues, R&B, and trad jazz. And so we got to do this thing at the Marquee, and the next thing we knew, we got picked up. Pete Townsend came and saw us playing, and so we got picked up by Track Records and the management there, Kit Lambert and Chris Stout, who were filmmakers and had a great idea of what was going to be coming and not coming in the terms of what sort of bands and what kind of music was going to be popular. And they stood out against the major record companies who still were looking conservatively at what they thought would be successful. So Lambert and Stamp got in touch with the Marquee and said, we want to have Arthur on the... So they decided that, yeah, okay, and with Lambert and Stamp came up with the idea that, okay, I'll come down and I'll be lowered by a crane. And in those days, people weren't doing stuff like that, you know. So, I had a very primitive fire helmet, and we had just written Fire, so it wasn't yet popular, and people didn't know it. But the helmet was great, and so the lights man was in charge of the helmet, and it was a plate full of petrol, and then wings either side to stop it wobbling, because it only had a strap
Yeah.
under the chin, and without the wings, the plate would go, and then all the petrol would fall and everything would catch on fire. So we got ready, and I was put in the crane, but he had in his excitement, he had overfilled. So this was pouring down me as I stepped into the crane, and there was about 20 different people say they were the people who poured their beer. I think there were two of them, so a beer in each hand. So it was 4 pints of beer went all over, and when I sort of came out of it, I looked like a sort of bedraggled beaver, I suppose. And so, but we still. So that was the Windsor Jazz and Blues.
Yeah, and one thing you bring up, something I want to talk to you about, and this is a good place to address this. Talking about Lambert and Stamp, Kit Lambert, for most people would know him as the Who's manager and everything. What do you think? Do you have any reflections about him? I know he produced the Crazy World of Arthur Brown, your debut. What was it like to have his guidance and his acceptance and kind of like wanting you to be, around and playing with all these acts that he was working with?
Well, at the time, everybody suddenly realized that, the underground club is successful. It's only held about 1,000 people, but the newspapers were all onto it, and they knew that in America the hippies were, the famous thing. So they thought, so all the major record companies started to come down to that underground club, and I got the most free dinners I've ever had, and in good restaurants. But we just looked and thought, well, they don't know what they're doing with the kind of stuff I'm doing, which was sort of performance art with music. And on the other hand, when Pete Townsend came down and then took us eventually to Track Records, after taking us into his own studio and making the demos of this fire thing that I was thinking of. Then he took us to Lambert and Stamp, and we thought, well, of all the ones we've been approached by, they have done The Who, and The Who were into, destructive art and all of that. So we thought, well, then he probably, of all these, appreciates what we're trying to do more than the other ones that have come and tried to get us to sign. So that led to then contact with the Track office. And the Track office was people with rascals, rogues, and geniuses, And so you'd go in there, and on an average day, there'd be everybody from ballet dancers, people from the opera world, police chiefs, politicians, transvestites. Everything was going on in the Track office. So you kind of thought, well, we've come into contact with a different world than the one we knew before. And so Kit, his father was a classical composer and of some note, Constance Lambert. And so Kit had a very great taste in classical music, and as well as, obviously liking rock and roll, because he liked things that were brash and defying the status quo. And so the next thing we found, we were working with Pete Townsend. We were on tour with The Who, Joe Cocker, the Mindbenders, Joe Cocker, and all the antics that Keith Moon got up to, and the strange behaviours. So it was a wonderful surrounding, and none of us had actually been in a studio in a proper, a really proper condition of making, a proper album. And so working with Pete Townsend was really good. He helped us see what the possibilities were that we wouldn't even consider doing. Like, oh, well, this number's not finished. He said, no, I think it is finished.
Yeah.
Just keep talking. Don't write a melody. I said, but I only talked it because I didn't have the melody. He said, no, but it sounds great like that. So I thought, oh, okay. And he had an eye, because he was himself at that point considering writing a story which was musical, and it was about the Chinese, and it was called Rael. That gradually morphed into what became Tommy.
Yeah.
And so he liked my singing and thought it was quite rock but operatic. And so at the first, I was going to be the lead character, and then Kit Lambert said, "Wait a minute, no, we've got to keep this for the Who."
Yeah.
To Townsend, and they had all these discussions and arguments, and in the end, they obviously did go, and it worked very well. But I do remember Lambert coming in, and he said to me, "By goodness, Arthur, I'm going to con them." And I said, "Well, who?" And he said, the general public. I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, I'm going to appeal to their snobbery." And I still don't know what you're talking about. And he said, "Well, this thing Townsend's got, I'm going to call it an opera, which it jolly well isn't. But you just see, those snobs will be writing about it critically and making it into something it really wasn't at the time. But in itself, it was something groundbreaking anyway. So, it doesn't matter what you call it, concept album, rock, opera, or whatever."
Well, now, mentioning Lambert, I've read a lot about him. He fascinates me, but Stamp does too. Now, did his brother's connections in the film world, that I'm sure that brought a whole nother element to what you guys were doing, And
Yeah. Oh yeah, Terry.
Yeah.
Oh, he was ready for the revolution. he was ready to go in the front lines of it, And of course, then he did with his social behavior. He broke most taboos you can think of.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it was a real help. He brought a lot of people into contact with Chris, and of course he was a very attractive man. He was.
It's kind of the face of swinging London in a way.
Yeah. And so he managed to bring this sort of coterie together, and so as they used to say, well, Kit takes care of the young audience and takes care of the old ladies. Chris takes care of the young ladies. And that's how they did, got all their contacts.
Right.
And that spread out into America, contact with Bill Graham at the Fillmore, and that's how we got over there.
Yeah.
And of course, they did that whole brilliant campaign to get the Who back into the top line in America, because the career had gone down a bit.
Yeah.
And they went over there. They were doing, I don't know, 6, 10, maybe 12 concerts a day, short ones.
Yeah, yeah.
And they'd do one here, and then they'd fly, 300 miles, or drive 150. Another one. And in the end, it really paid off.
Yeah.
Of course, there was brilliant songs.
Yeah, and you mentioned, they were this proponent of destructive art. When I look back, like my mother was a Beatles fan, my dad was the Stones guy. So I always felt like the Who were the ones that I was like, I'm a Who guy. Because it seemed like they had, for lack of a better word, a god-awful racket that got people's attention.
Yes.
When you take that time. And mentioning the Who, did you ever have any evenings with Mr. Keith Moon?
Oh yes, he liked to give dinners.
Yeah.
And at that, you have all kinds of people attending it, as well as down at the Speakeasy Club, which was the place in Margaret Street in the centre of London, where if you were in town and you were a musician, afterwards you'd go down there and eat, and then you'd get up and play. And you'd play with Zappa, Hendrix, everybody anybody was down there and would get up and play with each other. So it was a magnificent scene. But Keith's dinners at home were a different one. And I remember the first one I went to his house, and he's got a big stairway coming down, and then at the bottom is, just a bit back, is the table, the big dining table. And so he opened the evening walking through the downstairs door as a ship's captain, and so that went on for 15 minutes. Then he said, you've got to go and hoist the mainmast. So he goes up, comes back down, twirling his Western outfit with guns flying, doing the, and then it went on. He changed costume about every quarter of an hour for the whole night.
You have so many people that they hypothetically want to be in that situation with Keith Moon and Oliver Reed. And I really think there's only few people that could have sustained that kind of an evening. So,
Well, there was Viv Stanshall from the Bonzo Dog Doodah band, who himself was a complete maniac and very brilliant. And so those two together, I remember one, an apocryphal story, but it is actually true. They decided they would go down to the German drinking kellers that they have in the centre of London.
Yeah.
And so Keith decided, well, I'm going to go as Adolf Hitler.
Oh my God.
So he puts on the moustache, he has the hat and the coat he's got, and Stanshall goes down as Goering. And so they walk into this German drinking club, and so Stanshall strides up to the bar and says, "The Führer will have his usual." And the barman was not to be outwitted. And he said, in that case, we will do it in the usual place. And it was new place, so they'd never been there before. And he said, come with me. So he took them round the back, through where everybody was, into another part where there was nobody, and there was a little room. And so he said, you sit here are your beers. And so he outwitted them.
Wow, yes, absolutely.
But they were into that kind of street theatre, and and it was a bit like Monty Python. It was not serious.
Yeah. Well, that kind of leads me to the thinking about your career. To me, you blend rock, you blend theater, you blend music, and you blend philosophy, and I know you studied philosophy in college. How does the fusion of all that come together in your life that made you put all these elements into your art?
Well, firstly, I was born in the war. Everything, two houses, one after the other, were blown into dust. We were living up in the north of England. That was blown to dust. We had the hotel over the harbour where they now do Drakfest and all of that. My father at that time was in the Metropolitan Police. His PC 602 decided to, okay, we'll go down and live in London. And he was assigned to the East End, and we lived in a road called Whipcross Road. And one day, my mother, while he was out doing his beat, my mother decided to take my brother and I out for a walk. And she got about 400 yards down the street. There was this huge explosion behind. And that one was gone, too, all dust. And all the streets were on fire and everything. So I got quite interested in fire. And also then I got very much into English poetry, Blake, Shelley, Keats, Shakespeare. I loved Shakespeare. And so I wanted to write something. And I wrote the first part of Fire when I was 15. And my parents, particularly my father, had kind of a PTSD because by that time he was in the Air Force and they were out bombing people, you know. And that he was a psychic, so he got very, very upset with all that. And he was, he had these, flashes and all of that, and it wasn't an easy family to be in. Mm-hmm. So one day, somewhere between 11 and 13, I think it was, I came back. There was a different bicycle in the hall. I said to my father, "What's that?" And he said, "Oh, I brought this man. He's going to teach you how to empty your mind because I know you're having a difficult time in our family." And so that was my first meditational, and I did that. And so when it came to writing an album, I wasn't so much interested in cars and fast living. It was what the meditation had taught me, or enabled me to look at, that was interesting to me. Mm-hmm. And so then I started to read. I went to London University eventually to study law, but I studied trad jazz and modern jazz and left. Well, I was asked to leave, and that introduced me to the Everyman Film Theatre in Hampstead, where all the art films of that day and the historical films down in the Students' Union that were Battleship Potemkin, and Ivan the Terrible, all of those, as well as Japanese horror films and stuff, became something that suddenly, and I also got introduced for the first time into the idea that, actually even Western science is now saying there are two minds. Mm-hmm. And so I became looking at that, and when after the the next university where I learned to play double bass and started my own modern jazz quartet and stuff. After that, I went to Paris and started a rock career. And there was a guy called Baron Lamour, and he had a troupe of young beatniks. He used to dress like Louis XIV or 50, whatever it was, 15, I can't remember. And he had long curly hair. He wore the long coats, the frock coats, and rings on every finger. And he had a troupe of beatniks, and they used to discuss Buddhism and all of those ideas. And so I got into that, and that led on to various other actual current ideas of how life could be lived differently, how society could be formed differently. And that led into eventually putting all those ideas into the songs I sang at UFO, and the audience at UFO wanted to hear those. When we tried it in other parts of the country, we got pushed down the stairs, our equipment thrown out of the rooms. You know, it's like, this is not rock and roll. You know, so yeah, that was some of the reasons why all the philosophy came in, and so then I wanted to, you know, on your first album you want to sing about what's been occupying you.
Yeah.
So I did. I thought, well, I love flames and fire, and I spent a lot of time when I was young looking at fire as it burns, the coals and everything, and the colors it goes through, and the movement of it. And some of the movement is flickering flames, then you get deeper, and it's the deeper heat, and then a whitish gold heat, and that hardly moves at all. The other deeper heat still moves a bit slowly. And so it became rather, to me, like a doorway into a different universe, because when I was watching that, I got totally still, like it. And then I sort of entered the heart of the fire, and then went somewhere else. So, you know, that's what I was writing about, really.
Well, it's really amazing that you make that, you know, that comparison about the, you know, the still part of the flame. And let's talk about Fire a little bit. You know, I want to get around to the new record, but Fire's, you know, a song that most people know you for, and the Fire poem leading into Fire, especially the version, you know, you put on this record. I was there. I was with it. That poem, it got me right where I needed to be, where I was completely vulnerable and was able to just hear the beauty in that, you know. And a lot of people, I've always been fascinated by people going another way, you know, realizing there's another way to do everything, you know. But you've lived with this song now over 50 years. How is your views on it? How is your relationship with it changed or progressed over the years?
Well, it was the last song of the, you know, the concept of a kind of story, or a poetic movement. And the rest of it was part classical and some R&B and soul-y type music. And that didn't seem to work for Fire itself. And so there was, above the place where Vincent Crane and I rehearsed and wrote the songs, a rehearsal room, and there were two people in there working with an Indian singer called Ellie. And one of the songs they were working on, I thought, oh, well, I like that. So I went and talked to them, and we agreed to take a little bit of their song and then put in what we'd got. And the result was Fire. Now, for me at that point, I thought, oh, well, this is not bluesy, and so it's poppy. And, I don't like it as much as the rest. But we started to play it, and everywhere we went and played it, it was the only song that people came up at the end and said, that was a great song. So we go, oh well. And so then it was part of the stage act, and it became very powerful, because to me that was a real connection with fire and flames, and this was one aspect of it. And that was a dark image. We also had in the act a lot of comedy in those days. And one of the comic songs was Give Him a Flower, where we actually took the piss out of the hippie thing. You know, what shall I do? Give him a flower? No, hit him over the head with a bottle. No, give him a flower. No, I'll get him with a bicycle chain. You know, and so I remember getting on our first tour a letter from Pete Townsend, and it said, Kit and I and Chris have been long discussions, because now that the thing is recorded, we can't decide whether we're going to use Give Him a Flower or Fire as the main single. And so eventually he wrote another letter and said, we've decided the darker image is one that we can actually open the whole scene with. And so that was how that was finished while we were on the tour. It was put out, and by the time we got back, it was already a hit.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned meditation, and one thing, you take fire. Fire has a really an effect on an audience and people. It moves. When you look back at especially in the 60s and everything, how do you feel about substances like marijuana or LSD? Do you think they help an artist, or do you think they hinder them?
Well, I think firstly that at that time it would have benefited people to know a little more about it, particularly over here, where, you know, if you were a person with a delicate mentality, that I don't mean you're weak or anything, but you're on the edge naturally. It's not always a good thing to take any of those substances. And I think in one way that was what pushed Vincent Crane over the edge. He got spiked one time and never came back, really.
Yeah.
So not always good. There are some people who advise using it in the same way that tribal peoples use it as a sacrament, in which case then it's kind of got, it's going to do its own thing, but it's got a channel that it's being directed into. I don't necessarily think that it is going to make someone who's not creative. And I don't think that, for instance, when I wrote Fire, everybody thought it was an acid record. I'd never touched it. And so it was like, oh, so now I'm the champion of LSD, they say. I've never took it.
Yeah.
And so that was a surprise to me that, they think you're not going to be able to do anything like that unless you've taken substances. And then you have to look back at a lot of the poets, different times, and the nonsense rhymers. They were exposed to all kinds of chemicals and things, and had hallucinations and fantasies. So it's not something you can say a definite thing about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one thing I want to ask you about. You've literally been around, and you yourself are one of the pillars of this music that an entire festival is being, celebrated this weekend. When you look at, you take The Who, you take Jimi Hendrix, you take Frank Zappa. When you look at yourself now, and for some of these folks, to see yourself still as this vibrant artist, still as somebody progressing at 77, correct?
Yeah.
How does it feel when you look back and see that, people like Zappa, people like Hendrix, they're not here to experience that or have that opportunity?
Yeah. I particularly say with Hendrix, I mean, Zappa was already experimenting with, Middle Eastern musicians and things. Hendrix, I felt that he was, he started out blues and rock, went into wah-wah, went into visionary music. And at the time when I started to jam with him down in the Steve Paul's Scene Club in New York, and it was orchestrated by Lambert and Stamp, because Hendrix was looking to move forward. He'd had about 5 hits and he wanted to move, and Lambert always used to say to his artists, good, you've got a hit. Now you've got a responsibility to your audience, and they will expect you to move on. They won't want you just to make replications of the same number. So I know Hendrix called me over in LA and said he would like to do an experimental group which would have Vincent Crane on keyboard and the Experience. And I was going to sing because he liked my singing. And he said, what I envision, man, is, we got tapes of Wagner going in the background. And then we got huge projections. And then there's the drama going on at the front there, which is you. And I'm playing these wonderful, and he had it all envisioned. And that was when Vincent got spiked. So he was gone for 6 months. And it all went a different way. And I started to think, well, that sounds great, but it's not where I'm wanting to go. But I know that Jimmy, from that, was beginning to experiment with classical music. And looking back at, say, Coltrane, he experimented with Western music and then decided, okay, I'm going to go further back. I'm going to go to India, because that was for him the spiritual home of his music.
Yeah.
And I could see Hendrix. He was already exploring Western classical music. The next step would be either Africa or India, and probably both. And I could imagine because his imagination musically was obviously unbelievable.
Oh yeah.
So he would have encompassed all of that, and we would have had a new world music which is totally unlike what's out there now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and with Frank, he was likewise
Yeah.
experimental and brilliant mind.
Well, it's something you appeared on. You appeared on the Alan Parsons project, Tales of Mystery and Imagination. You know, you appear on the Telltale Heart. That scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. So yeah, what was it like to work with him? Like somebody that at the time was known as this like guru of sound. You know, he was involved in so many amazing projects. What was it like working on that project?
It was very easy. Wolfson, the guy who wrote the lyrics, was the kind of front runner, if you like. I met him first, and he said, "Look, I was working on this song to put together with someone else. It's a version of Tobacco Road," and he said, "That all fell apart, but I want to use the riffs." And that was the riff of Telltale Heart.
Absolutely.
And so first of all, I thought, oh, well, this is, an interesting way. And he just, then I didn't see Alan first. And he said, look, here's what we've got so far. Want you to come in, I think it was in 2 days, and see what you can do. And so I went in and met Alan, and so he said this rather shy person came in, that was me, and we all thought, ooh, well, not sure of doing Telltale Heart with this person. And he said, then he opened his mouth. And and it was a real pleasure with him because he knew exactly what he wanted. And he knew where he could just say, look, this is what I want. This is how it's played. Plays me the track as it was recorded and everything. And then said, go, and let you do it. And I think it was either the first or second take, and there it was.
Lightning in a bottle. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You've been so kind with your time here. I've got just a couple more questions, and one of which I think is probably one of the most important things we're going to discuss. And we have your new record, Gypsy Voodoo, which is such a amazing journey, and I think me and you you're actually literally putting footsteps in the desert here now as we speak, and this record, we could go so many ways with it, but like, what to you pull off vocal gymnastics in a lot of these songs, and one song that I really want to discuss is Love and Peace in China, which is just insane, just such a great song, and tying in with that, how did this record come about, and what are you trying to get across?
Well, the record came about through the fact that I'd been jamming with Mike in his studio for 25 years, on and off. And so one day I had a poem. It was Radiance, that's on one of the spoken
Yes,
ones.
Amazing song, yeah. Great guitar work in it too, yeah.
And so I gave him it. I said, look, I don't want rock and roll. I don't want it to sound like it's trying to be a song or anything. Just make it sound avant-garde. And so I didn't hear anything. I thought, well, that's that one. I'm moving around other projects, you know. And then oh, no, it wasn't Radiance. It was this song that was about a big drum falling out of the sky. And so I gave him that, and I said, don't make it into a song, even though it rhymes and everything. And so suddenly one day arrived the MP3, and he'd made it into this amazing piece. So, right, well, there's the start of something. And Claire and I were, Claire's my partner and my manager.
Yes.
He's
yes.
hiding in the other room.
Yes, yes.
And we went over and saw Mike, and we all sat down and said, look, let's make this thing that is not a normal record. And initially we were going to do a spoken word all the way through, and we were going to do it in round tents with sound all the way round and coming in from the roof as well, so that we could get 3D effects. But gradually, over time, thinking, well, how are we going to present this? And PsychFest was going on. I was doing some gigs with Ronnie and Evan. And so the idea came like, well, we could do the rock concert and then maybe the afternoon before do the spoken word. Mm-hmm. And then gradually as we went along, it seemed, well, that's it's a great idea, but financially it's not really feasible.
Yeah.
And so we decided we'd like to put some more stage-worthy pieces in there as songs. And we looked at the different stages of, you know, what I'd gone through musically. And Claire was has listened, and we discussed the philosophical ideas. And you know, she's quite a brilliant designer and a creative director, so it naturally all fell together.
Yeah.
And then Mike was also, you know, thinking very carefully about, okay, how are we going to layer this so that people get a feel for not just like, here's a new album, which it is, and some of the sonic areas are right up with, you know, the modern ways
Absolutely,
of doing
yeah,
things.
yeah.
But also, we can give an idea of where the music has been, where it went over the years that I've been doing it,
Yeah.
and put it all in one album.
I love that idea of taking, you know, it is this journey that I think incorporates every part of your career, everything from The Crazy World to Kingdom Come to everything up to this, you know, and it's such a, you know, statement of who you are now, I would think, but also who you've been.
Yeah, and there were times when it seemed to have deviated away from what we'd set out, and then it started to have its own identity. And then, you know, with those things where it's growing, you can doubt it one minute, next minute you go, oh no, I see that in it. And so it was a very good organic creative experience for all of us.
Right.
Shall we get Claire in to say a couple of words?
Yeah, absolutely.
Claire?
Would you
Yes,
like to come
yes.
in and say a couple of words?
She would.
Come on in.
Come on. Can you put, is she in there?
Yeah, yeah.
If you get really close to the chair, it will be perfect.
Yes. So Claire, would you introduce yourself for our listeners, please, and viewers?
My name is Claire, and I'm Arthur's partner, and we work together in producing really a creative life and music, and hopefully the show from the album that's just come.
Well, how fulfilling is it for you to see this album come to fruition and
So
see him
exciting.
performing it?
So exciting, and really lovely listening in to what you're saying, because it was, for me, it's a really beautiful thing of a 30-year friendship with all these sort of lines that were just caught, and Mike has archived and kept because he loves Arthur. Arthur loves Mike. And the way they've worked together on it is really beautiful as well. So Arthur, I would say, the lyrics kind of kicked it off, but Mike's ability to know Arthur, to know the whole history of his music, and then say, hey, try this, and Arthur saying, well, how about this? Watching that for me was really great. And then actually standing with Arthur, and he was sharing it with people, and then watching the feedback, listening to you, it's really exciting, and every bit of it, down to the photograph, to the presentation, to all of the artwork in it, everything is all people associated with Arthur that Mike has then gone on and put it out, and we've all worked together, and it's just to really to hear people enjoying it and to understand the premise of what it was.
It's a beautiful idea. Just perfectly realized too, and just hearing that, because there's definitely a heavy air floating through it that's soothing. I didn't mean that, and like meaning that it's something that really was, means something. So to hear that side of it is just fascinating.
And that's really beautiful to hear, because we've worked hard on what is the God of Hellfire.
Right.
And actually that's a whole other interview really, but the premise of what we were doing was there's the dark and the heavy, but actually it's so the opposite side of that, really, the meaning of it. And so hearing you say that's precisely what it was. Arthur's remit, if you like, was I want people to understand what the God of Hellfire was about, the whole entirety of it, the darkness and the light, and actually for that to be recognised rather than, just the chap that set my head alight.
Yeah.
So,
and
that sounds crazy.
You psychically feel that. Like, I've always been a fan of yours, but I've never been afraid of you outside of the Telltale Heart. When I was like a little kid, my dad was. But I think that's an important, too many people want to focus on the dark when there is so much light in it. And I think you're such a beautiful light in this world, bringing that and having Claire to help you realize that on this project is amazing. But I think that fascinates me, because I feel like people, they swing too far on one side when there's just everyday life. Everything you encounter is just light and dark, and a mixture of that. So, Arthur, I just want to thank you so much for giving you this time. Claire, thank you for speaking with us. But I'd like to ask you our final, just quick.
Yeah.
Like I said, I do think you're this wonderful light, this beacon in this world. Is there any wisdom you want to impart to our viewers?
Oh, well, you live your life, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can live it from the heart, then that's a real gift. And a lot of the old values, even if you take them away from religion, they're still the deepest that most people have seen into the human being, the human psyche. They don't change. We haven't changed that much. What's changed is technology, the speed of life, so that all of the mishmash of stuff that is thrown at us allows what most people would call the darkness to surface, to come out. And I think this time is like that. And so all you can do is find out who you are, really. And apart from that, I don't have anything that I think, oh, I should tell people that.
Well, that's more than enough, and just the simplicity and the beauty of it. But I want to thank you so much again for being a part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you all for watching. This has been Johnny Ray with the Ratio Podcast, and I've been fortunate enough to be here with Mr. Arthur Brown.
And I'm lucky enough to have somebody who asks real questions and who allows the breadth of everything to appear. That's lovely. It's been a lovely experience. Thank
Absolutely. That means everything to me, and that's why we do this. Thank you so much.
I want to thank Arthur Brown and Claire so much for giving us the opportunity to sit down with him out of a super busy time for him at Psycho Las Vegas. But man, how about that chat, Jack Slayton?
Oh, it was incredible. Such an engaging and charming person. It was an honor to hear those stories. From someone like that's been in music for so long and has worked, is such a staple, such a legend, It's incredible.
And there's so much in that chat when he talks about, he pretty much gives you a guided tour through swinging London. I've talked to a lot of people. There's a lot of stuff written about that era, but not anything really definitive. So when you hear somebody's first person account that was there,
such a candid view, it's really a rare thing to come across.
And just all the people that weave through there, Kit Lambert, Stamp, and Terrence Stamp, and Townsend, all these people, all these movers and shakers, but when you get down to it, also that fire story.
Oh yeah, that was a haunting story.
It gives me chills. I like every time I see a flame after that, I look for the blue and just see that calm that he's talking about.
Absolutely.
But thanks again, Arthur. We will be in touch soon, and a real honor to talk to him. And everyone, please go out and get his new record, Gypsy Voodoo. It's a fucking blast from beginning to end, and really a lot in these songs, and a new version of Fire and Fire Poem that'll blow your socks off. But that's our show for tonight. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at Ratio Podcast, and you can also find us on Facebook and Apple Podcasts. That's our show for tonight. Stay switched on, and we'll talk to you soon.